All righty, everyone. Welcome to the Lead Generation World podcast. We are streaming live on LinkedIn and YouTube, as well as the Troutman Amin YouTube page as well. So what does that mean for you? One, thanks for joining us. It's really awesome. We love actually kind of doing this live. One, because you guys get to participate. And whether you're watching it on any three of those channels, the Troutman Amin YouTube channel, the Lead Generation World YouTube channel, or right here on LinkedIn, you can comment and we'll see those comments. And frankly, I want to encourage you to comment, ask questions. We've got Eric Troutman, these are of the TCPA world, with us today. And, it's rare we get an opportunity to ask those questions that you may not otherwise get, or may cost you a lot of money to answer. And so we've got them. We've got Eric here to answer them out of his own goodwill for this industry. And that goes for a lot of other things he does for this space. So take advantage of it is my point. And ask questions, say hello. I see some of you joining in now. We're gonna give it another minute here, so I'm gonna ramble just for a second while people continue to join, because we're gonna talk about really a lot of great stuff. With the elections happening, and what does that mean for the TCPA? What does that mean for the industry? There's a lot to pontificate on, and also a lot to talk about facts and what that really means. And so we're going to be doing that in just a few minutes. While I do have a minute, I do want to remind you that Lead Generation World is coming up in a couple months. This is going to be a hot topic, of course, and we're going to be talking about it there and talking about all sorts of things with regards to the lead gen world. And I do have, for those of you joining, I do have a discount code for you here. It's scrolling across the bottom, $200 off. We know it gets expensive, so there's a code there that you can utilize to get some money off as well. So enough of the promotional nonsense. I do want to again introduce Eric Troutman from Troutman Amin LLP. These are of the TCPA world. And if you don't know, here's his website here, tcpaworld.com. I'm sure you all know. I mean, if you don't know, I'm not entirely sure what rock you're living under, especially if you're following Lead Generation World and you're on this podcast. So he always has the best information, the most timely information. And if you're not subscribed to that, that website and that newsletter, I don't know what you're doing. So Eric, welcome to Lead Generation World. I think I dragged out a good 3 or 4 minutes to let people join. I feel like we need to dig right in. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. It's really good to be here, and I'm excited. And this is the biggest webinar of the year for me. I think it's the biggest webinar for everyone listening. I think it's impactful, obviously, the election, and I think the ramifications that we're going to talk through today are profound, and not just for Lead Generation World, but for the whole world. And if I may, I know you always ask some really good questions. I kind of just would like to start, just kind of talk through a couple things philosophically at a high level, if I can.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what are your thoughts on what happened? I mean, go ahead.
Well, I'm not gonna answer that question.
Okay.
Because look, I can't be political, right? I mean,
this isn't a political conversation necessarily on opinions.
Yeah. I mean, I send around an email that has Trump in the subject line, and I lose 20 followers. And by the way, I don't lose followers. I'm the czar, for God's sake. People don't tune out, and they shouldn't, because why would you? But people are very, very caught up with this. And I want to start by saying, remember the 5th of November. 1605, 419 years before the election that just took place last week. Guy Fawkes tries to literally blow up the government. And now, 419 years later, we put a man in power who might do just that. It is a fascinating turn of events. And I want to start by telling all of you, in case you don't know, my own political leanings, which is that I am not a Democrat. I have never voted for a Democrat in my life, and I certainly would not have voted for Kamala Harris. I'll be honest with you. She failed the bar. I mean, you can't work at my law firm if you didn't pass the bar the first time. So to me, that was disqualifying. But I'm also on record saying I am not a Republican. I would never have voted for Donald Trump. In my opinion, the guy tried to overthrow the government. The end, right? For me, that's also pretty disqualifying. So as I look at the choices that this country had, I see a fundamental problem. And in my view, and so I want to talk about something that it's really kind of at the heart of what's wrong with our country right now. And if I can, I want to remind everybody, I don't consider myself Democrat or Republican. I'm an American. I'm an American. I believe in this country. And if I had to choose what country I would be a citizen of, it would be America. And not because we've got bombs and guns, and not because we make great television shows, or even because we make great smartphones, but because this is the first country in the history of the world that was founded on philosophy. And a guy named Thomas Jefferson, who's deeply, deeply devout in studying natural law and the social contract and how to provide freedom to people against a government, spent his entire life preparing to write a document known as the Declaration of Independence, and then later part of the Constitution. And that Constitution was crafted for the first time, literally, folks, for the first time in history, was crafted to assure freedom to people. That had literally never happened before. I hope that you all know that. We take it for granted now, but it had never occurred before our Constitution. And so when I look at our Constitution, I look at the particular genius and the time spent to do one thing above all others: separate powers. Separate powers. Because the fundamental belief at that time was that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if that is true, then we're about to see absolute corruption, because Donald J. Trump now has absolute power over this country. And I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat or something else. If that doesn't at least bother you a little bit, then you need to go back and read your Constitution, okay? Because it should. The Constitution was never designed, ever, to have all three branches of government operating for one man. It was never designed that way. It was the opposite. The problem, though, right out of the gate, was that these things, these conspiracies of people called political parties, started immediately going to work to try to hack our Constitution and take over our country. And it didn't work for over 200 years. But just last week, on November 5th, for the first time ever, it worked, in the sense that all three branches of this government, including the courts, are now very, very right-leaning. Even though this was a very narrow election, right? Very narrow election, this ultimately is going to result in what I believe is a revolution, which means that everything we think we know about how the law works might change now. Everything. I was on stage in front of 900 advertising lawyers 2 days ago. And I got on stage and I told them, look, guys, you attorneys are going to be more necessary than ever before. Your advice is going to be more important than ever before. You have to really, really pay attention to everything now, because your clients are going to need your advice. And it's through that lens, through that spirit, with that kind of understanding, that I come here today to talk with all of you, to tell you that we're going to do our best today to predict what's going to happen. But right now, we are in a historic time. And I know it might not feel like it. It might not feel like we're part of a revolution right now, right? There's no guns, there's no tanks rolling down the street. But believe me, trust me, when you see Matt Gaetz being nominated to be the Attorney General of the United States of America, folks, this is a revolution, and it's over, okay? One side has won, and that side has that complete control now. And when that happens, the next step is something called the purge, for those of you that have studied history. I'm not going to talk any more about that, but I want you to think about that as we move through this. But the bottom line is, I'm going to do my best to kind of answer questions. I'm going to do this from a traditionalist standpoint, meaning that we assume that everything stays more or less the way that it was before. We still have, courts that operate more or less the way they did before. We have rules that apply more or less the way that they did before. All of this could change. Please keep in mind, anything is on the table. When I wrote that on my blog, I was not kidding. Anything is on the table right now, because all of the power has now been consolidated into one group of people. So anything could happen. And we can't make assumptions that we know where these people are going to land on any particular issue. All right. So just please keep all of that in mind as we start kind of working through this. Now, with all of that said, I would love to talk TCPA and talk through.
So I think that's a great framework, first of all, of where we're at today. And I also think maybe we should set the table a little bit even more. And before talking about, okay, post-election, let's talk about a little bit what's built up maybe to the election with regards to the TCPA in the current month that we're in now, and maybe a month or so leading into it. There has been, you guys have been working with the FCC. There has been discussions with them regarding TCPA. Can you share any discussions sort of pre-election of where things were with them?
Absolutely. So on behalf of REACH, you guys know Responsible Enterprises Against Consumer Harassment. I'm the president of REACH. We've been speaking with the commission, both with the Bureau, those are the guys that actually write the rulings and the law, and also with the offices for each of the commissioners to talk through a couple of things, really three things. One is we wanted to check in on what is the status of the one-to-one rule, particularly around the Small Business Administration, the SBA's efforts to maybe claw back a little bit of the provisions that are in that rule. And I have really, really good news on that front, like really good news, which is Gayla Huber in particular, and IntegraShield, a REACH member, has done a fantastic job kind of making inroads there, has obtained really very positive feedback, was invited, to kind of move forward with certain, I don't want to talk about it too much, I don't want to screw anything up, additional filings perhaps to try to massage and soften parts of the rule. And it was looking great. To be honest with you, it was looking great. But we have a problem now, right? Which is Ted Cruz properly, not saying he did anything wrong, properly sent a letter now to the commission asking them to put the pencils down on everything. Well, that likely includes a revision to the one-to-one rule that we were working on for the last few months. So this is just kind of the first moment where everyone should recognize that what people thought would be a victory for lead generation, at least out of the gate, at least initially, might actually not be great for us, because rather than have a revision that we were anticipating, at least potentially, that was going to soften a lot of the terms, now the odds are pretty low that anything changes between now and January 26th, which is, of course, the effective date. So that's bad news out of the gate.
Okay, so that is unfortunate, because it sounds like, just to reiterate, things were potentially moving in a direction that could have been softened up in the rule, whatever that means. I don't know, but there was going to be potentially some improvements from our perspective on that one-to-one rule consent, but with Cruz's letter and request. To not do anything, basically pause until any further developments with the board is done. That could be paused. Now, what are they? Do they? I mean, is this a what is the how serious do they take Ted Cruz's letter? First of all, and do they continue to work, especially in light that they may not have a job soon?
Yeah. So let's just talk about that real quick.
Yeah.
So first of all, they take it very seriously.
Okay.
This is long-standing precedent with these agencies. And in fact, Jessica Rosenworcel, who is the current chairwoman of the FCC, had literally written the same request to the former chairman, Pai, when he was the chairman. She, as at that time a commissioner, said, hey, look, when Biden won, hey, put your pencils down. We can't do anything. We've got a new administration. So I would be
did they concede to that?
Yes.
Okay.
So I would be absolutely stunned if the commission went forward with anything controversial right now, and it'd be subject to congressional review anyway. So I don't see that happening. But what is going to happen, and this kind of segues into as we start kind of pontificating about what the future is going to look like. What will happen is, some point probably on January 20th, maybe a little bit a day or two before, maybe a day or two after, but right in that time frame. Jessica Rosenworcel will step down as the chairwoman, and in all likelihood will step down from the commission. She will then vacate her spot, which will then be filled at some point by Donald Trump. Now, it took Biden 9 months, right, to even propose somebody. When he did, it was Gigi Sohn. That did not pass muster. And so we did not have a full FCC after Biden's administration took over until Anna Gomez was became the commissioner like 2.5 years later. I do not expect that Donald Trump is going to wait 2.5 years to get somebody in at the FCC. In fact, this is one of the things, going back to the absolute power that Donald Trump now has, is he, has done such an incredible job. I mean, I got to give the guy a ton of credit. He's done such an incredible job preparing himself for transition and, having the ability to understand and map out essentially all the federal agencies and be in a position to put his people into place incredibly quickly. Again, I'm not making like a moral. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I am saying it is impressive. I'm saying it is impressive, and I believe fully that he will, rapidly nominate an individual, and it will not be me. Okay, people. There was a lot of people kind of, speculating if I was going to have a role in the administration. The answer is no. I do not make a very good lieutenant. And again, I'm not expressing an opinion on this other than to say, Donald Trump is looking for people who are going to do what Donald Trump wants them to do. And I'm a little jealous because if I was in control of the government, that's exactly what I would do too, right? I don't want people in there thinking. So he's going to find somebody that he thinks is going to be aligned with him. He's going to have that person nominated. And I would imagine that the commission will be back at full strength probably by July, and maybe even faster, right? So I'm anticipating that it's going to go very, very quickly. So you will have now a Republican-led FCC that will be, 3-2. Again, probably no later than July. It could be May. It could be even earlier. Once that happens, of course, now the commission has the opportunity to make waves. It can make new rulings, adjust previous rulings, and again, in the past, the FCC was not a terribly political institution. Before Obama, the FCC was very independent. I mean, it was a very independent institution. It operated very independently. Virtually all of its staffers were lifers. That's still true to a degree. And the commissioners were largely Democrats or Republicans in name only, right? They were there to serve the greater good. And by and large, that's what they did. If you want to point fingers at the politicization, I think without question, Obama and some of his appointments started that trend. Trump furthered that trend. Biden furthered that trend. And now we are absolutely a highly politicized organization over there at the commission. We just are. And so that does beg the question, right? If the one-to-one rule goes into effect in January, and it will, and there's nothing that I see, barring, again, recognizing that nothing's impossible, right? From a traditionalist standpoint, there is nothing that would prevent that rule from going into effect January 27th, and the lawsuits to begin shortly thereafter. Again, anything could happen. I mean, Trump could come in and say, I'm banning all federal regulation until Elon Musk has a chance to review everything. Who knows, right? You can't rule out anything right now. But assuming that things go the way they more or less generally always have, that ruling will be effective, the courts will be open, and the lawsuits can begin. Now, without question, with the new Republican administration in there, somebody's going to try to ask the FCC to reconsider something, right? And will that work? The answer is maybe. Let's first recall that the original one-to-one rule was not 3-2, it was 4-1, okay? Meaning that one of the Republican commissioners already voted in favor of this thing. So is it possible that Republican commissioner changes his vote and reconsiders something he supported before? It's possible. Do I anticipate that? I do not. Secondly, remember, robocalls are a bipartisan issue. In fact, our new majority leader, John Thune, from the great state of South Dakota, who's now in charge of the Senate, the fourth most powerful person in the country, he wrote the Trace Act, guys. Okay, so this guy is very focused on robocalls. In fact, he has made it his mission as a legislator to focus on robocalls. And if there's one other thing I'll say that's very positive about Trump, and I think Americans detect this, I think this is why they voted for him, is he gets shit done, right? And the people that he puts in his administration are going to focus on getting things done. That could be good for small businesses and callers, or it could be bad, right? if his administration decides we're going to put an end to robocalls, unlike previous inept efforts by the government, I have every belief that they'll get it done. And that is not necessarily a good thing for everybody, right? I mean, it's going to be a good thing for consumers, at least in many instances, but how's it going to look for lead gen? I don't know. Maybe not that good, right? So I think as we start kind of mapping this out, game planning, right, how things are going to look, again, through a traditionalist lens, I think we need to assume one-to-one is still going to happen. There's not going to be any modifications to it now in all likelihood. And there will likely be challenges up to the commission. I cannot rule out that those challenges might meet with success, but there's nothing that I see that says, oh, absolutely, the new FCC is going to side with the robocallers, the small businesses, the lead generators, and shut down this awful one-to-one rule. That could happen, but there's nothing that I see that says, oh, that's definitely the way things are going to break. So again, recognizing that anything's on the table, anything could happen, we should move forward assuming that one-to-one is going to be the law for at least, that we should assume it was going to be the law.
Okay, well, that was going to be my question. Is like, okay, because I really like to get some idea of timelines, right? So, like, you threw out some different things there when and comments around how quick these appointments may be made, and your assumption is that you think they'll be done quickly, or certainly quicker than the past administration. But we've got one-to-one consent. Okay, your assumption that the efforts that just to summarize, the efforts that have been being done right now probably won't make a effect on because of Ted Cruz's letter and request. It's not going to make an effect, and it will go into law. Then the courts will be open to taking cases immediately thereafter. You also said that obviously there's a bipartisan to stop robocall. I think frankly everybody wants robocalls to stop. That's somewhat separate though from one-to-one consent, which I think is the main concern of the industry from a financial and economic growth standpoint, is really the one-to-one consent, not necessarily robocalls, but obviously that plays a part too. So that's sort of the summary we're at. We have an option. We can kind of go into a greater discuss or a broader discussion around where you think enforcement's going to lie down the road, how it may affect businesses in the industry, the impact on lawsuits. We can talk about how states may show up to this now, because there's two different things, right? Where do you want to sort of go down?
Oh man, there's so much fun here. Let's get to states here in a second, but let's stay federal. Okay. Federal for just a moment if we can.
Yeah.
So I think you put your finger on something very important from a policy perspective, which is differentiating between robocalls on the one hand and the superpower of the lead generation industry and helping small businesses on the other. These are two different things. And I believe, as we started and framed this out from the start, reach is the answer to this, right? Setting standards and having self-governance of industry actors that follow good standards. That is how you stop robocalls. And we've stopped, you saw 11 consecutive months, guys, robocalls have been down because of the work that we've done together as an industry, right? But at the same time, you have to give breathing space to the small businesses and the lead generators and let them continue to serve consumers, right, the way that they need to be served so that they can win, right? So that is the policy push. It's always been the policy push. I believe that will be more likely to be absorbed by Republican in the FCC. But ultimately, right, again, these are Trump's movement is a populist movement. It's a populist movement. And if they can't sell to America, the broader America, that this is a good policy decision that will result in essentially more robocalls, I don't know how much help we're going to get, right? That's at the commission level. But you're right. I mean, you've got the right talking points, and we're going to keep hammering. But I want to focus now real quick, stay at the federal level, on Congress, because as I mentioned, right, Senator Thune is now in charge of the Senate. Now, technically, Vance is the president of the Senate, but he's the majority leader in the Senate. Incredibly powerful guy, pretty decent fellow too, from everything I've heard, and very thoughtful. And again, I don't think it's inconceivable that we see additional legislation around the TCPA. Now, you remember in the last session, there was an effort to expand the auto dialer definition, regulate AI, require disclosures. build in a bunch of new provisions into both the TSR and the TCPA. These efforts died, as we predicted that they would. But in this new realm, it would not surprise me at all if Thune, using his new role, kind of immediately got to work looking at something on the TCPA. Now, the good news is that there will likely be something, because it's a Republican-led House now, something pro-business in there. That's the good news. I think it'd be more of a compromise bill than we were looking at before, certainly. The bad news is that I think it will still likely do something to expand the TCPA as well, to better protect consumers from robocalls, right? That's going to be the talking point. So we're going to have to wait and see, but I would not be shocked at all if we start seeing legislative efforts this year. And I will note, and I put this on one of my blogs, Speaker Mike Johnson of the House said, we're going to have the most aggressive 100-day agenda that Congress has ever seen. And I mean, I don't doubt that at all, guys. I do not doubt that at all. So again, everything's on the table. And I think, some additional legislation around the TCPA is going to happen. But now moving over to the states, or go ahead.
Yeah, let me before you get in the states, I am kind of curious to sort of get a unofficial poll, like from our commenters, like how do they feel about the difference between those two things? How do they feel about potential new legislation for expanding what an auto dialer and getting into text messages? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's just a real basic question for their business. So when you can put it in the comments, just say good thing, bad thing regarding the expansion of potential legislation around robocalls and text messaging. Just kind of curious. So let's dive into states now. Obviously, if the federal government sort of takes off the gas pedal a little bit, puts on the brakes, that doesn't mean we're all in the clear. We know that every state has their own regulations, and it's highly complicated for a company to understand what those all are. And certainly there's, states like we live in California that are very progressive with some of these different things, and there's some that are conservative. So where does this sort of lie? Because now some of these states, as my guests are going to feel like they are empowered to have to step up and implement these rules that may not be being done by the federal government. What's your take?
Yeah, so I gave you kind of the background in my view and philosophy on the kind of the unification of power right now in the personage of Donald Trump. The question is ultimately, like, what's the philosophy that's going to guide the use of that power moving forward? I think one of the major bends is states' rights. Right. I think the federal government is now in a position for the first time, since the 1890s, where it might start shrinking. And again, I express no opinion on if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But the reality is that the states now are going to have more power. I don't think there's any question about that. And I think the states, Gavin Newsom's already out there taking shots, right? They understand now that more so than ever before, our states are going to start to operate the way they used to, frankly, which is as little mini countries. And again, I express no opinion as to whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. But that is going to start happening more and more. And one of the backlashes of that movement, as we start thinking not in the next year or 2 years, but maybe in the next 4, 8, 10 years, as this trend continues, is companies are actually going to start doing business more and more only in one state because of the complications, or in one region because of the complications trying to operate in different states. But the bottom line is, I fully and completely expect states, particularly blue states, but not always. Remember, Indiana has been incredibly aggressive with their anti-robocall measures. So is North Carolina, although they did have a Democratic AG, who's now, by the way, the governor. They have also been very aggressive, although they're traditionally more of a conservative red state. So it doesn't necessarily track that anti-robocall measures are going to be found in blue states, but obviously the blue states are out there. And, there's no question in my mind that as the federal government pulls back, these states are absolutely going to step in. There's just no question in my mind. So greater focus than ever before for all lead generators, data brokers, right? Callers, carriers, platforms, everybody in this ecosystem needs to understand that additional state regulations are going to come out. And I'm going to tell you, just as I told you, I think Trump is preparing to really get in there and just really hammer away, I think that energy and that speed and that determination, again, fortunately or unfortunately, is going to end up being mirrored, right, by the blue states who want to do something right back at them, right? And so we're going to get to this weird kind of arms race, I think, between the federal government kind of making its huge shift and the states now who are going to start making their probably big, equal but opposite shift. And it's going to be really fascinating to see how this plays out.
Yeah. I'm really curious. We didn't touch this, so I'm going to circle back just a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a step back, and I apologize for going back and forth, but I didn't get a chance to ask you about sort of this period where there is some sort of uncertainty. You did mention once January comes around, that once that gets enacted, the courts will be open, they can do things. But as of like right now, is there sort of a limbo of litigation or businesses and uncertainty around enforcement, because things are sort of paused? Where does it stand as of like for the next 3 months?
Right now we are facing, as you guys hopefully like we're at the pinnacle of class litigation madness right now.
Yeah.
The number of TCPA class actions filed this year is like 40% over last year, and that was 30% over the year before. And people are putting up charts saying, "Oh, but the overall number of filings is down." No. The overall filings are down, but the overall class action filings are way up. And the class actions are the things that take your business away, right? An individual suit, that's $15K. Who cares, right? We're talking about the suits that are worth billions of dollars that you don't have, right? Those are the ones to be worried about, and those are up this year more than ever before. And that's right now. And the courts, guys, I got to tell you, I'm seeing worse rulings from the courts in TCPA cases right now than I think I've seen in my career. And
what do you mean by that? Worse? What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean worse in a couple of different ways. Kind of a double entendre. Worse meaning bad outcomes for TCPA defendants, but also worse meaning like poorly reasoned, very fast, kind of shoddy work. They're just kind of putting stuff together, slapping it out and getting it out. It's like the TCPA cases, the judges don't want to deal with them. And don't get me wrong, these are federal judges. I mean, they're breaking up the Mexican mafia. They're, deciding tariff issues for the whole company. They're doing big things. So when they get a TCPA case on their desk, they're like, come on, another robocall suit, right? Settle it, right? We're gonna keep it alive. We're going to order a bunch of discovery, make it painful for the defendant, and settle the case, right? And so the mindset right now of the federal judges, unsurprisingly, is that robocalls are bad. Robocall lawsuits waste their time and annoy them, and they're going to pressure the defendants more or less to settle the case as quickly as they possibly can by just giving them awful, gruesome rulings. And if you're following the TCPA world, man, you are seeing just some gnarly stuff for the lead generation world. I mean, lowermybills.com was found to be an unenforceable web form. Well, I mean, what else do you have to say, right? Like one of the biggest lead generation sites in America was found to be unenforceable. I cannot overemphasize how hard it is right now for a defendant that is buying leads to defend successfully a TCPA lawsuit based upon a third-party lead that they have purchased. It is very challenging right now. The climate is very challenging.
Say that one more time for me.
Yeah, I cannot.
Like how hard? Like say that. You said it's impossible. Say that one more time.
No, it is incredibly difficult. I mean, look,
yeah,
we're Troutman and me, right? We win. Okay, that's what we do. But when you look at what's happening out there, like across the TCPA world landscape, you guys know I read every case every day, and I blog about it on TCPAworld.com. I've got a complete history of the TCPA. So when I tell you 2024 was without a question the worst year for TCPA defendants ever, believe me, I am telling you the truth. Not just because more cases got filed, but because the illusion that third-party lead generation was somehow bulletproof is gone. It just shattered. That illusion is shattered. Defendants that are buying leads and making calls in reliance on those leads are getting killed because the form is not being deemed enforceable, because the lead was purchased from an aggregator who purchased it for someone else, who bought it for someone else, who went out of business, and they can't produce the records, right? Basic failures of proof, basic inability to authenticate records and get them into evidence, the inability to get a Jernaya token, the Jernaya token not actually demonstrating playing properly. Like just all these things are leading to, just all these unforced errors, people tripping and falling over themselves, can't even win basic motions because of basic evidentiary issues. It's just bad out there, Mike. It's really bad. And again, to me, we saw Quote Wizard get crushed, right? But to me, the lower my bills.com ruling, it's just the height of the old way of doing things kind of crumbling down. And anyone that's relying on that old way, you're at risk. And remember, there's a 4-year statute of limitations, right? So you're at risk for the next 4 years, even when the rule changes.
Okay, so and just for clarification purposes, when you say not enforceable with regards to a form, what do you mean?
I mean, the court looked at the form. Okay, so let's back all the way. Remember, in order to have, make a legal phone call using regulated technology under the TCPA, you have to have express written consent. Express written consent is defined in the CFR, 47 CFR 64-1200 F9. It has 9 components. All of those 9 components need to be clearly and conspicuously presented to the consumer. In the lowermybills.com case, the court found that the disclosure was not clear and conspicuous. In fact, the court found it wasn't even reasonably conspicuous, not even reasonably conspicuous, because it was in small font, it was charcoal gray against a white background, but most importantly, below the button. Guys, if your leads have a below the button disclosure, you're in harm's way. Now, I'm not going to tell you it's a 100% chance that you're going to lose, because there are some courts that will enforce that. But you are in coin flip land at best. So just recognize that. And if you think the plaintiff's bar is afraid to bring a coin flip lawsuit, you're crazy. They'll bring those things all day long, right? And they'll bring 10. And if they win 5, they're driving away in a new Maserati with a new yacht. So they're happy with that.
Got it. Okay, so to go back to my initial question, though, none of this pausing of anything stops or slows down these enforcements right now.
No. Yeah. So when you say enforcement, I usually think of enforcement from a regulatory standpoint.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about lawsuits, we're talking about litigation, private litigation, people just bringing lawsuits. Nothing is going to slow down people bringing lawsuits. That is going to continue to be present.
Right.
Now, on the enforcement side, you might see a slowdown, but truthfully, there's not really all that much enforcement. There's some at the federal level, but there's not that much at the federal level anyway.
It's the civil.
So it's the civil liability that you're looking at, and none of that slows down. None of that stops. And again, one of the bad, short-term outcomes of Trump winning is, guess what? Biden right now today is just minting federal judges as fast as he can, right? And again, this happens. Every lame duck administration has done the same thing. Had Biden won, he wouldn't be doing, or Harris won, they wouldn't be doing that. But because Trump's there, they're just like, go, stack the courts, right? So guess what? All these new lawsuits that are going to be filed, a whole bunch of them, maybe half of them, going back to the coin flip, are going to be in front of brand new appointed Biden justices. And, he's doing what, again, I'm not trying to throw, mud on him particularly, because every administration does this. He's not looking too deep at these people, right? Necessarily. He's just making sure they're on the left, they're blue, and putting them in the court. And, Trump did the same thing. Again, I'm not throwing mud. Yeah. It's just a fact, right? Yeah. These are going to be partisans. Their qualifications might be great. They might not be, but they're going to be sitting over your case.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, the expected influence, because what I've heard so far from you is, the conservative party, Republican Party still will go hard in the paint on robocalls, regulating text message calls, that sort of thing. But potentially there may be a loosening up of the one-to-one rules due to the effect on small businesses and businesses in general. Is that your sort of take right now?
So I think that's my long-term take. Yes.
Yeah.
I think my short-term take is, short-term take, it's actually worse that Trump won, because we were gonna get some changes. I really believe we were gonna get some changes, and now I really believe we're not going to get any changes. And so the law is going to go into effect in January as written, and it is going to be effective during the next year to 2 years. Might there be some softening at some point in the future? Yes. I think there might be, right, through some advocacy work. I'm hoping that Reach can work with the new administration. I'm hoping that we can get them to kind of, understand the impact on small business, just as the old administration did, and maybe they can pick up right where we left off, right? I mean, all of that is possible. But again, when you're talking about the FCC, do you know where the one-to-one rule ranks in terms of their priorities? Like way down here at the bottom, like way at the bottom, guys. So in order for us to really expect anything new out of this administration, we've got to go through the months and frankly years of education process, get them focused and have them make a decision. Again, recognizing they're probably going to move faster than previous administrations, but so I do think eventually you're going to see some modifications. Those modifications, though, almost certainly are going to be prospective only, which means from January 27th, 2025 to whenever we get some relief, you're still wide open and exposed, right? That exposure is not going to go anywhere. So just because a change might happen in the future doesn't mean you don't have to comply with the law right now, right? The laws change from time to time, but you still have to comply with the law until it changes. So please keep that in mind. Don't think, oh, well, eventually I'm going to be saved, so I'll just litigate the case for 2 years and then it'll go away. No, it's not going to work that way, guys.
Yeah, this is crazy. I'll be honest with you. This isn't what I was expecting to hear. And I think a lot of people would have thought like, hey, this is all really, really good. But this sort whatever you want to call it, stay or this pausing of any developments really threw a wrench in the spokes.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, who knows? Maybe Cruz's office, gets wind. Maybe they're watching this webinar right now, let's say, and then maybe they write a little letter over to the commission saying, hey, for the record, we support helping small businesses, so maybe let this go forward. Who knows? Or maybe Cruz or somebody helps the new commissioner to get up to speed very quickly on this issue, and so they're ready to act more quickly and provide some modifications. All that's possible, right?
Well, does that provide? Okay, so does that open up an opportunity to reach out to Cruz's office and submit some requests or some information to him?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage everyone that has touch points on the Hill to use them right now, right? I mean, right? I mean, look, please understand, these guys are insanely busy right now. Again, both sides are gearing up for metaphysical and hopefully not literal war. Okay, so they are going to be very, very, very hyper-focused. That at the same time, though, they are hyper-focused on setting an agenda, right? And if you want to get on the agenda, now is a decent time to, try to knock on some doors. Now, TCPA world has a lot of reach. That's all I'm going to say. So it's possible that certain people are tuning in and kind of hearing what I have to say already. But if there are, additional touch points that anyone wants to leverage, it's not a bad idea to try. Again, I think it's going to be real tough to get a meeting right now, real tough. But if you can get 5 minutes of a staffer's, time over a cell phone call, try to do it.
Okay. Yeah, no, this is amazing info, and I want to give just a moment because we just have about 10 minutes left of this webinar, and I want to give some opportunities for people to ask some questions. We do have a few coming in, but for those, please go ahead and type them in now for Eric. And I'll make sure to read them off. Before I ask this one question here, because I think it goes back a few steps. I want to ask you sort of, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you want to talk? We talked about where things were at today, the effects of the election and how negatively potentially affected it, where we see post-January moving towards and that sort of timeline. We talked about states and the idea that states may step up some of these regulations and enforcements. What else? Did we miss anything?
Well, I think there's an appeal that people are very interested in. The IMC appeal is set for oral argument in December.
Okay, explain what this is. Yep, explain what it is.
Yeah, so when the rule went into effect, or when the rule was passed, there was a 1-year time frame given before it became effective, but the time to appeal the rule began immediately. So, business got this opportunity to not have the rule effective while an appeal is taking place. Those two things were not necessarily related, but they worked hand in hand. The appeal is a challenge by a group called the Insurance Marketing Coalition, which is another trade organization, and they are challenging the rule on frankly, in my opinion, not the strongest grounds. And so that's why I have not been talking about it. Like I read this thing and I just thought, well, this is pretty much DOA. However, I will say the opposition from the FCC, and I love you guys over at the commission, not trying to be mean, but it wasn't the strongest, right? They just say they didn't. I don't think they really devoted all that many resources to this, which just goes to show. I mean, like the FCC has so many other priorities, So I think in a weird way, the IMC caught the commission a little bit flat-footed, which you wouldn't have expected given how much time they put into crafting the order, because their opposition wasn't terribly strong. And with the developments now around the Supreme Court looking at the Hobbs Act and possibly striking it down, it raises an interesting kind of tug and pull, because the challenge was actually brought under the Hobbs Act. So if the Hobbs Act gets struck down, then was this challenge even properly taken? It's kind of interesting. It's just kind of interesting little wrinkle. But leave that alone. I think it's worth everyone paying attention to it now. I think TCPAworld.com will be live blogging the hearing, talking about what we're seeing as it's going on, live, so that folks are aware of it.
What's the date on that again? Sorry.
I think it's December 12th. I want to say it's December 12th.
Okay.
Yeah. But my official, percent chance of that thing winning is like 5%. Now, again, when we hear from the judges, maybe we'll hear something stunning. Like, we don't think anything should be enforced until, the new administration takes over. So we're going to pause. I mean, it could happen, right? Like you can't, like I said, I'm looking at this from a traditionalist standpoint, from the institutions of the government are going to continue to work the way they're supposed to work, or have worked historically. I guess I can't say supposed to work, have worked historically. But again, from a revolutionary standpoint, anything is on the table. So they could walk in there and the judges could say, you know what, we're just going to wait to see what happens in January, and we're going to issue a TRO and nothing's enforceable. It could happen. Can't rule it out. But again, that shouldn't happen from a traditionalist standpoint.
Got it. Okay. I've got one question. Sort of like I said, it goes back a little bit, but we'll go ahead and ask it. If Michael says, if I have someone request an info or a quote on my website and they're giving consent to be contacted, do I have this request recorded? Do I have to have this request recorded with something like Journai or a trusted form to be compliant?
So if it's on your own website, if it's a first-party lead, then the answer is no. If it is a third-party lead, then under the new record-keeping requirements, the commission does require callers to actually take possession of the consent record before they make the outbound call. Now, exactly what that means is unclear. It's going to have to be tested in court. But in my opinion, you can get that by having a Journai or a trusted form, right? I mean, that looks like a pretty good record of consent to me. So I don't own stock in these companies. Kind of wish I did. But I would certainly encourage my clients to consider using that technology as a way to meet that record keeping requirement. Although there are other ways to do it as well, but you've got to be doing something, because you can't just buy, leads, meaning like an API push that sends one line of data into your CRM that launches a call. Like that's not going to cut it, guys. You got to have something that demonstrates that consent event took place.
All right. There's been mixed. This is from Randy. There's been mixed thoughts on the use of pre-selected checkboxes for multiple sellers in a form for one-to-one consent, and having consumers physically check each box. What are your thoughts on best protocol for multiple checkboxes to be compliant with the one-to-one ruling?
Yeah, when I was at ANA, we had a bunch of lawyers in the room, and that was the Association of National Advertising event I was mentioning that was at on Tuesday. A bunch of lawyers in the room, and this was a very hot topic. So Troutman Amin's official position, you can see it on the Troutman Amin 15, is that you can use multiple boxes with select all, and you can, if you do everything else right, you can even have them pre-selected. In other words, we don't believe that pre-selection is going to be dispositive of the issue of the enforcement of the form. If the form is otherwise perfectly good, transparent, has all the Troutman Amin 15 requirements, good. I will tell you, and I'm not afraid to tell you, other lawyers disagree with me. There are lawyers that will tell you, no, you cannot have these things be pre-selected. And there are some lawyers that will go so far as to say, the rule requires you to have one consent at a time, and therefore you cannot even have a select all button. I personally think that those lawyers are wrong. I just think they're wrong. There is a acceptable debate. Reasonable minds can differ between pre-checked and not pre-checked. And very reasonable minds will say, I want the consumer to do something additional than just click a button to demonstrate that they are accepting consent. But again, I've won cases like this before, and therefore I believe that we can win them again. But everything else has to be right. Okay. You cannot be tricky. You cannot have green check boxes that you can't tell are, actually radio boxes. You can't put it below the button. You can't have it be small. You can't trick the consumer. No dark patterns. My goodness. I'm seeing mock-ups of like below the button, small italicized, like little tiny, not even like you can't even tell it's a checkbox. It's just like a little X next to names. And I'm like, you guys are killing me, man. Like, no, that is not going to be enforceable. Like, don't do it to yourself. You're going to get killed. But if you have a nice, good, clean, transparent, or form that's elegant, nothing distracting the consumer, like here it is, and they're pre-checked, I don't think you're gonna lose because of that. I'll put it that way. But yeah, definitely get yourself legal advice on that, though. It's a big issue.
Okay. Do you see the comment here? When you say take possession of the form, do you mean being the single owner of that consent?
No, not necessarily. I mean, if it's a multi-buyer, multi-brand form, right, there might be 4 different companies. Yeah. All 4 of them can take possession of the consent record and not be the only owner. What I'm talking about is actually having in your server, in your business records, a copy of the screenshot, a video rendering, some data element, something that tells you what took place that day, not just the API with the information that the lead entered. That's not enough. You have to have the form itself somehow in your possession.
Okay, this kind of goes on to that last question. What's your position on auto selecting if there's only one resulting company being suggested to the consumer? I'm not entirely sure I understand that.
Yeah, no, I think what the essence of the question is, can the website decide for the consumer who they're going to hear from, present that name, and have the consumer accept only one name? And the answer to that question is yes. If the website generates the lead, presents, you will be here, click here to hear from State Farm, Allstate, Geico, in just one name, and they click accept and it's clear and everything's clear, yeah, then that is going to be enforceable. That is the consumer accepting to one seller, and so that's going to be just fine.
Got it. New record keeping rights say 5 years, but SOL is 4 years for TCPA? Question.
Yep. I mean, the regulators can require what they want to require, right? And if they require 5 years, then they can require 5 years. And the breach of that provision, right, would be on the 4th year, right? Fourth year, day one. Let's state it differently. If you only held your records for 4 years, right, you haven't breached the rule until that last day. So you're not going to be prevented from being sued on the failure to hold 5 years of records because of the 4-year statute of limitations. They'll have essentially 9 years to sue you. Fun, right?
Jeez. Okay, last question here. Would the trusted form certificate that links out to the API's database be sufficient to be taking possession, or do you need to download the actual video to your server?
Yeah. See, that's a really tough one. And that one, because I'm seeing that right now, right? Active Prospect has their cloud service where you can kind of store your credentials there on their server and you can access them when you need them. The question then becomes one of agency, right? Well, really, the question becomes like, how do you interpret the rule, right? And the rule is very vague. You could take one of 2 positions on that. Position 1 is that it's in your possession or control in the sense that you can ask for it at any point, and therefore, hey, you took possession, right? You're not relying on the third-party lead provider, which is the essence of what the commission is trying to get at. Another way to read the rule is it says, no, the business has to take into possession, and Active Prospect is not your agent. They don't work for you, right? You're not a single enterprise. You're 2 separate companies, so you don't have possession. The end, right? That one's tough. I can't answer that one for you. You're gonna have to get a lawyer to look into that.
Okay, so I really appreciate this call. It like I said, it didn't go as I expected, and I think it was really, really enlightening. And what I would like to tell people is that you must subscribe to TCPAworld.com to keep up to date with this stuff. It's an excellent read, and this is why I like Eric so much, because he can speak regular English and write regular, like my 5th grade English level, and I can
Mhm.
comprehend it. And so that and that is very useful. So guys, take a look at tcpaworld.com, but also at Lead Generation World, we have Pooja, your partner Pooja Amin, who's one of our experts, and we've got this new feature at Lead Generation World, which is an hour with one-to-one consults with experts, and they're only 10 minutes long. You can sign up for them. If you're a registered attendee, you get 10 minutes with Pooja and to ask some questions. And if you don't know, that kind of time is really, really, really expensive. Um, and by all means, it should be. Okay, Eric, I'm not trying to tell you you're charging too much or anything like that, but I'm just saying it's very, very valuable time, even if it's just 10 minutes. So if you're interested in meeting with Pooja or any other topical level experts, Lead Generation World is going to be a really great opportunity to do that. And you also likely see Eric and all his team there as well. God, final words, Eric. How do we end this one for our listeners?
Well, okay, a couple things. First, Lead Generation World is going to be excellent, and I want to end this kind of the way I started it, which is I've done my best not to express opinions here, right? Because at this time, opinions can be very dangerous, right? Especially for lawyers. We need to get the facts. We need to have the truth, right? And that's going to be a day by day kind of measured data point analysis sort of enterprise, which I got to tell you is how I built TCPAworld.com, right? It's the idea of amassing every potential data point to inform on a complex issue so that you can make the best possible decisions. But that's not just me plugging TCPA World. Yes, you should be following TCPA World, but you should be looking for data points everywhere you can get them. And yes, even talking to other attorneys who aren't named Eric Troutman, because right now you want to get as much information as you possibly can. And I highly, highly encourage you to attend Lead Generation World and any other conference where there's going to be credible people talking with you. And most importantly, though, try to tune out the noise. Don't listen to I never watch any news. Like, don't listen to stuff that might fill your head with ideas that aren't true. Get the facts and then make reasoned, intelligent judgment decisions for your business based upon the facts as they come out. That's what I'll tell you. Very important.
Well, we'll end it there. I appreciate everybody joining in. Eric, again, thank you for your time. It's really appreciative to not only just me, but I know the whole industry and everyone that participated. Don't forget, folks, this was a live presentation, but it will live here at this same link on YouTube, on Troutman Amin's YouTube page, on Lead Generation World's YouTube page, on LinkedIn. So you can come back here, you can share it. And then, of course, you can reach out to Eric at TCPA World and on his LinkedIn page and all sorts of different ways. So thanks again, Eric. I really, really appreciate it. Everyone else, thanks for joining. We will see you next time.
All right. Thanks, man. See you later.